Picture this: towering marble temples gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, where thousands of gods watch over the greatest empire the world has ever known. Imagine a world where Jupiter's eagles never shared the sky with Christian crosses, where the Colosseum echoed with prayers to Mars instead of martyrs' final words. What if the message of a carpenter from Nazareth never reached the 7 hills of Rome? Have you ever wondered how different our world would be if Christianity had remained a small Jewish sect, hidden in the shadows of Jerusalem's ancient walls? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. Let us step back in time to an empire where 1,000 gods ruled supreme and discover what might have been if the greatest religious transformation in human history had never occurred. Chapter 1: The Empire of Gods. The year is 60 AD. The Roman Empire stretches from the misty hills of Britain to the burning sands of Egypt. In every corner of this vast domain, incense burns on marble altars, and the voices of priests echo through sacred groves. This is not the Rome you know from history books. This is a Rome where Christianity never took root. Walk through the streets of the Eternal City on any morning, and you will witness something magnificent. Soldiers march past temples dedicated to Mars, their armor glinting as they pause to make offerings for victory in distant battles, incense smoke. Merchants stop at shrines to Mercury, leaving coins and prayers for profitable trades. Mothers carry their newborns to temples of Juno, seeking blessings for their children's futures. The emperor himself stands at the heart of this divine web. He is not just a ruler, but a god among mortals, the living bridge between heaven and earth. Citizens across the empire burn incense before his statues, not out of fear, but from genuine belief that divine power flows through his veins. The Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, carefully manages this sacred relationship between gods and people. But Rome's religious world is not simple. Hundreds of deities from conquered lands have found homes in Roman hearts. Egyptian Isis comforts grieving mothers. Persian Mithras guides soldiers through underground mysteries. Greek philosophy blends with Roman ritual, creating new ways to understand the divine. This is a living, breathing religious ecosystem that adapts and grows with every passing year. The festivals never end. Spring brings celebrations of Flora, goddess of flowers. Summer honors Neptune with grand sea ceremonies. Autumn welcomes Bacchus with wine and revelry. Winter sees the Saturnalia, when social rules flip upside down and masters serve their slaves. Religion is not a Sunday obligation here. It is the rhythm of daily life, the heartbeat of civilization itself. Chapter 2: A small sect in Judea. Far to the east, in the dusty hills of Palestine, a very different religious story unfolds. In the narrow streets of Jerusalem, a small group of believers gathers in secret. They follow the teachings of a man called Jesus, whom they believe was the promised Messiah. But their message has not traveled beyond the boundaries of their own people. These early Christians are still Jews in every way that matters. They worship in synagogues, keep kosher laws, and celebrate Passover. The only difference is their belief that the Messiah has already come. Their leader, a passionate tent maker named Paul, dreams of spreading this message to the wider world. But those dreams remain locked within the walls of Jewish communities. The disciples of Jesus tell stories of miracles and resurrection, but only to those who already understand the promises of Hebrew prophets. Their message makes sense within Jewish tradition, but it would sound like foreign gibberish to Roman ears. How could citizens of an empire built on conquest understand a kingdom built on love? How could worshippers of war gods embrace a Prince of Peace? Without the roads and protection of Roman citizenship, these early Christian missionaries cannot travel safely beyond Palestine. Bandits control the mountain passes. Local rulers view foreign teachers with suspicion. The great highways that could carry their message to distant lands remain closed to them. So Christianity grows slowly, carefully, in the shadows of its birthplace. Small house churches spring up in Jewish neighborhoods of Alexandria and Babylon. Merchants carry whispered messages between communities. But the faith remains a river flowing within the banks of Judaism, never breaking free to flood the wider world. The message of Jesus speaks to Jewish hearts that long for liberation, for a Messiah who will restore their ancient glory. But beyond the borders of Jewish experience, that message finds no soil in which to grow. The seeds of a world religion remain unplanted, waiting for a sower who will never come. Chapter 3: The Road Not Taken. The moment that changed everything happened on a dusty road outside Damascus. In our world, the zealot Saul became the Apostle Paul after a blinding vision. But in this timeline, that conversion took a different turn. The man who should have become Christianity's greatest missionary instead became its first great persecutor who never found redemption. Paul's vision on the Damascus road led not to conversion, but to madness. The local authorities, seeing a man claiming divine revelations and disrupting public order, had him arrested and executed as a political threat. With Paul gone, no one remained with both the passion and the skills needed to bridge the gap between Jewish Christianity and the Roman world. The ripple effects spread quickly. Without Paul's letters to guide them, the early Christian communities fell into confusion about basic teachings. Some believed Jesus was fully divine, others fully human. Some insisted on keeping all Jewish laws. Others wanted to abandon them completely. Without a unifying voice to settle these disputes, Christianity fractured into dozens of competing sects. The Roman officials in Palestine watched these religious arguments with amused indifference. Just another example of Jewish infighting, they thought. Why should the empire care about the theological debates of a conquered people? The few reports that reached Rome described Christianity as merely another Jewish philosophy, hardly worth imperial attention. Meanwhile, other religious movements filled the spiritual hunger that Christianity might have satisfied. Mithraism spread rapidly through the Roman legions, offering soldiers a path to salvation through courage and brotherhood. The mystery religions of Isis and Dionysus attracted those seeking personal relationships with divinity. Neoplatonist philosophy provided intellectual seekers with sophisticated answers to life's deepest questions. The door that should have opened between East and West remained firmly closed. The message that might have transformed an empire instead withered in the desert heat of Palestine, leaving the world to follow a completely different path toward the divine. Chapter 4: The Jewish Faith Divided. Without the safety valve of Christian expansion, the tensions between traditional Judaism and Jesus' followers reached a breaking point. The temple in Jerusalem became a battlefield of ideas, where every religious debate carried the weight of national survival. The Pharisees, guardians of Jewish law and tradition, viewed the Christian sect with growing alarm. These Jesus followers claimed their teacher had fulfilled the law, making traditional observances unnecessary. They spoke of a new covenant that replaced the old. To the Pharisees, this sounded like the destruction of everything sacred in Jewish identity. The Sadducees, who controlled the temple and collaborated with Roman authorities, saw the Christians as a political threat. Any messianic movement could provoke Roman crackdowns that would destroy their carefully maintained power structure. Better to crush this dangerous sect before it grew too large to control. But the Christians had support among the common people, who were tired of endless rules and corrupt temple politics. The message of Jesus offered hope to the poor, healing to the sick, and dignity to the outcast. Underground Christian communities grew stronger, even as official persecution intensified. The Great Revolt of 66 AD hit both groups like a devastating earthquake. When Roman legions surrounded Jerusalem, Christians and traditional Jews found themselves trapped together behind the city walls. Some fought side by side against the common enemy. Others continued their religious warfare, even as the city burned around them. When the temple fell in 70 AD, both traditional Judaism and Palestinian Christianity lay in ruins. The Pharisees fled to establish academies in other lands, preserving Jewish tradition through scholarship and law. The Christians scattered to hidden communities, preserving their faith through secret worship and martyrdom. From the ashes of Jerusalem rose two separate religions, forever divided by their different understandings of what it meant to be chosen by God. Judaism rebuilt itself around Torah study and ritual observance. Christianity became a mystical sect focused on spiritual union with their divine master. Neither had the strength to challenge the religious dominance of Rome. Chapter 5. Rome's Eternal Pantheon. While Christianity struggled to survive in Palestine, Rome's ancient gods entered their golden age. Without the challenge of monotheistic competition, Roman religion evolved into something richer and more sophisticated than ever before. The old myths took on new meanings as philosophers and poets explored deeper truths hidden within familiar stories. Jupiter's thunderbolt became a symbol of divine justice that could not be corrupted. Venus's beauty represented the harmony that brings order from chaos. Mars's strength stood for the courage needed to protect civilization from barbarian darkness. Mystery religions flourished throughout the empire, offering personal salvation and direct experience of the divine. Soldiers crowded into underground Mithraea, where they reenacted the cosmic battle between light and darkness. Wealthy Romans funded elaborate Dionysiac festivals, where wine and ecstasy opened doors to spiritual transformation. Egyptian temples offered healing and prophetic wisdom to all who approached with sincere hearts. The emperor cult reached new heights of theological sophistication. Philosophers developed detailed theories about how divine power flowed from the gods through the emperor to his subjects. The imperial family became a pantheon of living deities, each governing different aspects of Roman life. Citizens could pray to the emperor for justice, to his wife for fertility, to his children for protection. Even the common people found new depth in old traditions. Household gods became intimate friends who shared in daily joys and sorrows. Neighborhood festivals strengthened community bonds that lasted for generations. The cycle of religious seasons gave meaning and rhythm to ordinary life. Roman religion had always been practical, focused on maintaining good relationships between gods and people. Now it became something more, a complete system for understanding humanity's place in the cosmos. The empire's spiritual foundation had never been stronger. Chapter 6. The Barbarian Conversions That Never Were. Beyond Rome's borders, The Germanic tribes maintained their ancient relationships with gods of war, thunder, and wild nature. Without Christian missionaries to challenge their beliefs, these warrior cultures developed their spiritual traditions in ways that would reshape the entire continent. The Goths perfected their shamanic practices, training spirit warriors who could enter trance states during battle. These berserkers claimed direct communication with Woden, receiving prophecies and battle plans from the god himself. Their victories against Roman legions convinced many that the old gods were stronger than Rome's imported deities. Celtic druids in Britain and Gaul preserved their sacred groves and stone circles, developing increasingly sophisticated astronomical knowledge. They mapped the movement of stars and planets, predicting eclipses and seasonal changes with remarkable accuracy. Their oral traditions grew into vast libraries of mythical and historical knowledge, passed down through generations of trained memory keepers. The Frankish tribes along the Rhine developed elaborate funeral practices that honored their ancestors as continuing spiritual guides. Great burial mounds became pilgrimage sites where the living could communicate with the dead. Warriors sought blessings from legendary heroes before going into battle, creating an unbroken chain between past and present. Norse seafarers carried their thunder god Thor to new lands, building temples in Iceland and Greenland. Their explorations of western seas were guided by ravens sacred to Odin, leading them to discover and settle lands that would remain hidden from Christian Europe for centuries. These barbarian religions were not primitive superstitions, but sophisticated spiritual systems adapted to harsh environments and dangerous lives. They emphasized courage, loyalty, and honor, virtues that made their warriors formidable enemies of Roman expansion. Without Christianity to unite them under a common faith, these tribes remained proudly independent, their gods as fierce and unconquerable as their people. Chapter 7. The Eastern Empire's Different Path. In Constantinople, the eastern capital of the Roman Empire, a unique synthesis of Greek philosophy and Roman religion created something entirely new. Without Christianity to dominate Eastern spirituality, this great city became a melting pot of mystical traditions from across the known world. The Library of Alexandria, never destroyed by Christian zealots, continued to grow into the world's greatest center of learning. Scholars from India brought Buddhist meditation techniques. Persian mages shared Zoroastrian fire rituals. Egyptian priests taught the mysteries of Isis and Osiris. All these traditions blended with Greek philosophy and Roman civic religion. The emperor in Constantinople became more than a political ruler. He was seen as a living philosopher king, a divine sage whose wisdom guided the spiritual development of his subjects. The palace became a kind of monastery where the emperor and his advisors spent hours in meditation and philosophical discussion, seeking the wisdom needed to rule justly. Byzantine artists developed a unique style that combined Roman grandeur with mystical symbolism. Mosaics in public buildings depicted not just emperors and generals, but cosmic diagrams showing the harmony between earthly and divine realms. Architecture incorporated sacred geometry designed to inspire spiritual contemplation in all who entered. Trade routes through Constantinople brought spiritual influences from as far as China and India. Silk Road merchants carried not just goods, but ideas about meditation, astrology, and the nature of consciousness. The city became a bridge between Eastern and Western spirituality, creating new forms of religious expression found nowhere else in the world. This Eastern Empire developed its own version of the mystery religions, focused on the transformation of consciousness rather than the worship of particular deities. Citizens learned techniques for achieving direct mystical experience, making every person their own priest and prophet. The result was a society more spiritually sophisticated than anything the ancient world had ever seen. Chapter 8: The Islamic Expansion. When Muslim armies burst out of the Arabian desert in the 7th century, they encountered a religious landscape completely different from our timeline. Instead of Christian kingdoms weakened by theological disputes, they faced the full might of pagan Rome backed by 1,000 gods. The theological debates were unlike anything in our history. Muslim scholars, trained in the strict monotheism of the Quran, found themselves arguing against sophisticated Roman philosophers who saw divinity as a cosmic force expressing itself through multiple personalities and aspects. These were not crude idol worshippers, but intellectual equals who had thought deeply about the nature of the divine. Roman generals invoked Mars and Jupiter before major battles, performing elaborate rituals that filled their soldiers with religious fervor. Muslim armies found themselves fighting not just for territory, but in a cosmic war between competing visions of ultimate reality. Each victory or defeat was seen as evidence of which gods were stronger. The famous Battle of Tours took on completely different meaning when Charles Martel's Frankish warriors fought under the protection of Thor and Woden rather than Christian saints. The pagan gods of Europe united against the monotheistic challenge from the south, creating alliances that would have been impossible in our Christian timeline. Captured cities presented unique challenges for Muslim rulers. How do you govern people whose entire worldview is based on multiple deities? Islamic law had developed detailed rules for treating Christian and Jewish minorities, but no guidance for dealing with sophisticated polytheistic systems. Some fascinating synthesis occurred in border regions, where Muslim and pagan scholars engaged in theological exchanges. Islamic philosophers incorporated some Roman ideas about divine multiplicity into their understanding of Allah's attributes. Roman mystery religions adopted Islamic practices of regular prayer and pilgrimage. These hybrid traditions created entirely new forms of spirituality. The result was not the rapid Islamic conquest of our timeline, but a long stalemate between two equally powerful religious civilizations, each convinced of their divine mission to transform the world. Chapter 9: The Dark Ages That Weren't. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire unfolded very differently without Christianity. Instead of barbarian kingdoms struggling to preserve fragments of classical learning through monastic libraries, pagan traditions ensured the continuity of Roman knowledge and culture. The great Roman engineering projects continued under barbarian rulers who saw themselves as inheritors of divine Roman authority. Aqueducts were maintained and expanded. Road networks grew to connect Germanic kingdoms with the continuing Eastern Empire. The technological regression that marked our historical Dark Ages never occurred. Pagan schools of philosophy, no longer threatened by Christian orthodoxy, preserved and developed Greek and Roman learning. The works of Aristotle, Plato, and Marcus Aurelius were copied, studied, and expanded by successive generations of scholars. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge grew steadily instead of being lost and rediscovered centuries later. The barbarian kingdoms that replaced Roman rule maintained the Roman pantheon alongside their own tribal gods, creating syncretic religious systems that preserved classical mythology and ritual. Germanic kings claimed descent from both Woden and Jupiter, legitimizing their rule through connections to the divine. Without Christian monasteries to dominate education, learning remained centered in cities and noble courts. Literacy was higher among both nobles and commoners, since religious ceremonies required participants who could read ritual texts and astronomical calendars. The practical knowledge needed for agriculture, craftsmanship, and trade was preserved and improved upon. Medical knowledge advanced without religious restrictions on anatomical study. Pagan physicians, trained in temple healing traditions, combined practical medicine with spiritual counseling. The result was healthcare that treated both body and soul without the guilt and fear that marked medieval Christian medicine. This alternative medieval period was not a time of darkness and ignorance, but of steady progress building on classical foundations. The intellectual achievements that we associate with the Renaissance occurred gradually and naturally, without the need for rediscovering lost knowledge. Chapter 10: The Renaissance Revolution. When the Renaissance finally arrived in this pagan timeline, it took on characteristics that would have shocked our historical artists and philosophers. Without Christian guilt about the human body and worldly pleasure, art and culture exploded in directions our history never imagined. Painters and sculptors celebrated the gods openly, creating works of breathtaking beauty that captured divine power in human form. The Sistine Chapel's ceiling, instead of depicting biblical scenes, showed the full Roman pantheon in cosmic glory. Michelangelo's David stood alongside statues of Jupiter, Mars, and Apollo that rivaled the greatest works of ancient Greece. The printing press spread not just Christian Bibles, but the complete works of ancient pagan authors that had been preserved throughout the medieval period. Every educated European could read Ovid's Metamorphoses, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and the complete plays of Sophocles in affordable printed editions. Scientific advancement accelerated without religious restrictions. Astronomers mapped the heavens without fear of contradicting biblical cosmology. Physicians dissected human bodies to understand anatomy without concerns about the sanctity of flesh. Natural philosophers developed theories about physics and chemistry based purely on observation and reason. The great explorers of this era sailed under the protection of Neptune and Poseidon, carrying Roman gods to new worlds instead of Christian crosses. When they encountered indigenous peoples in the Americas and elsewhere, the resulting cultural exchanges were very different. Pagan Europeans, accustomed to religious diversity, were more willing to learn from native spiritual traditions. Universities flourished as centers of both rational inquiry and mystical exploration. Students studied Aristotelian logic alongside mystery religion initiations. Philosophy and theology merged into a single discipline, focused on understanding humanity's relationship with the divine cosmos. This Renaissance was not just a rebirth of classical learning, but its fullest flowering. Art, science, philosophy, and religion worked together to create a vision of human potential that surpassed anything the ancient world had achieved. Chapter 11: The Forbidden Gospels Revealed. Hidden in the caves and secret libraries of Palestine, a treasure trove of early Christian texts survived the centuries of persecution. These forbidden Gospels, never standardized by Roman church councils, preserved radically different visions of Jesus and his message. The Gospel of Thomas, written as a collection of Jesus' secret sayings, revealed a mystical teacher more concerned with inner enlightenment than external worship. "The kingdom of heaven is within you," this gospel proclaimed, teaching techniques of meditation and self-discovery that resembled Eastern spiritual practices more than Western religion. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene shocked even sympathetic readers with its portrayal of women's spiritual equality. Mary appeared not as a repentant prostitute, but as Jesus' closest disciple and the receiver of his deepest teachings. She led prayers, taught other apostles, and was recognized as a spiritual authority equal to Peter and Paul. Gnostic texts like the Gospel of Philip and the Apocalypse of John presented Christianity as a path of hidden knowledge available only to spiritual initiates. These documents described multiple levels of reality, secret names of power, and techniques for ascending through heavenly realms to achieve union with the divine. The Gospel of Judas, perhaps most controversial of all, revealed the infamous betrayer as Jesus' most trusted disciple, following secret instructions to facilitate a cosmic plan for salvation. This text suggested that everything Christians thought they knew about good and evil, loyalty and betrayal, was part of a deeper mystery. These alternative gospels attracted small but devoted communities of Christian mystics who practiced very different forms of worship. They gathered in underground chambers for initiation ceremonies involving sacred meals, baptisms with oil and water, and visionary experiences induced through fasting and prayer. Without Roman imperial power to enforce orthodox doctrine, Christianity remained fractured into dozens of competing interpretations. Each group claimed to possess the true teachings of Jesus, creating a religious marketplace of ideas that would have been impossible under unified church authority. Chapter 12: The Council That Never Met. The theological chaos that Christianity might have avoided through unified imperial support instead became its defining characteristic. Without the Council of Nicaea to establish orthodox doctrine, fundamental questions about Jesus' nature remained unresolved for centuries. Arian Christians, following the teachings of Alexandrian priest Arius, insisted that Jesus was subordinate to God the Father, created by him rather than eternally coexistent. This view made sense to many believers who struggled to understand how monotheism could accommodate a divine trinity. Arian communities developed elaborate liturgies that carefully distinguished between the worship due to God and the honor appropriate for his greatest creation. Orthodox Christians responded with increasingly complex theological formulations designed to preserve both monotheism and Jesus' full divinity. Their debates about divine substance, personal hypostases, and the communication of properties created a new vocabulary that few ordinary believers could understand or follow. Nestorian Christians, particularly strong in Syria and Persia, emphasized the distinction between Jesus' human and divine natures. They developed sophisticated Christological theories that influenced Islamic and Eastern Orthodox theology, but remained separate from both Western Arianism and Eastern Orthodoxy. Monophysite Christians took the opposite approach, insisting that Jesus had only one nature that was simultaneously human and divine. Their theological position appealed to Egyptian and Ethiopian Christians who saw it as more faithful to biblical descriptions of the Incarnation. Without imperial power to enforce a single doctrine, each Christian community developed its own liturgical practices, theological emphases, and spiritual disciplines. Some focused on mystical union with Christ through meditation and asceticism. Others emphasized social action and care for the poor as the true Christian calling. The result was not religious unity, but creative diversity that kept Christianity intellectually vital, even as it remained politically powerless. Each community contributed unique insights to Christian understanding, creating a rich theological heritage that no single Orthodox tradition could have produced. Chapter 13: the pagan philosopher's triumph. Without Christian opposition to limit their development, the great philosophical schools of antiquity reached heights of sophistication that transformed how people understood reality, morality, and human purpose. Stoicism, the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, evolved into a complete religious system that rivaled Christianity in its appeal to ordinary people. Stoic temples offered practical wisdom for dealing with life's challenges, teaching emotional resilience and ethical behavior without requiring belief in supernatural intervention. The Neoplatonist schools, established by Plotinus and Proclus, developed detailed maps of spiritual reality that guided seekers through multiple levels of consciousness toward union with the Divine One. Their mystical practices combined rational philosophy with direct spiritual experience, creating a sophisticated alternative to both popular religion and mere intellectual speculation. Epicurean philosophy, often misunderstood as simple hedonism, attracted followers with its teaching that true pleasure came from friendship, simplicity, and freedom from superstitious fear. Epicurean communities became models of cooperative living that influenced social experimentation throughout the Roman world. Academic skepticism provided intellectual tools for examining religious and philosophical claims without falling into dogmatism. Skeptic teachers trained students in logical analysis and critical thinking, creating a culture of rational inquiry that accelerated scientific and philosophical progress. These philosophical schools were not merely intellectual exercises, but practical guides to living that competed directly with religious traditions. They established their own festivals, initiation ceremonies, and community practices. Many Romans found philosophical wisdom more convincing than mythological stories, creating an educated class that was both deeply spiritual and rationally sophisticated. The synthesis of Greek philosophical rigor with Roman practical wisdom produced a worldview that could address both personal spiritual needs and social ethical challenges. This philosophical religion proved remarkably durable, surviving political upheavals and cultural changes that destroyed purely mythological systems. Chapter 14: The Hidden Christian Underground. Driven underground by Jewish persecution and Roman indifference, Christianity developed characteristics that set it apart from all other religious movements of the ancient world. These hidden communities created new forms of worship, organization, and spiritual practice that preserved Jesus' message in remarkably pure form. Christian house churches met in secret, usually in the homes of wealthy women who provided both physical space and financial support. These gatherings emphasized simplicity and equality. Rich and poor, slave and free, men and women all participated as equals in worship that focused on shared meals and collective prayer. Without professional clergy or established liturgies, Christian worship remained spontaneous and participatory. Members took turns leading prayers, sharing prophetic visions, and interpreting scripture. This democratic approach to religious authority prevented the development of rigid hierarchies that might have compromised the movement's original egalitarian message. Christian mysticism flourished in this underground environment. Believers developed sophisticated practices of meditation, fasting, and contemplative prayer designed to achieve direct personal communion with Christ. Some claimed visionary experiences that rivaled those of the original apostles, keeping alive the expectation that the risen Jesus remained actively present in the community. The persecution that drove Christianity underground also purified it of worldly ambitions. Christian communities focused on mutual support, care for the poor, and spiritual development rather than political influence or institutional power. Their commitment to non-violence and social justice created a distinct Christian culture that attracted converts despite the dangers of membership. Secret Christian texts were copied by hand and hidden in caves, wells, and buried containers throughout Palestine and Syria. These manuscripts preserved not only biblical writings, but also letters between communities, theological treatises, and records of martyrdoms that testified to Christian faithfulness under pressure. This underground Christianity was harder to track and persecute, but also harder to organize and expand. Its survival depended on the dedication of individuals willing to risk everything for their faith, creating a spiritual intensity that visible, protected Christianity might never have achieved. Chapter 15: The Religious Wars That Weren't. The absence of Christian expansion created a fundamentally different pattern of religious conflict in the ancient and medieval worlds. Instead of wars between monotheistic rivals, conflicts arose from the clash between polytheistic tolerance and monotheistic exclusivism. When Islamic armies conquered former Roman territories, they encountered populations that had no concept of religious orthodoxy or heresy. Pagan Romans were accustomed to adding new gods to their pantheon rather than replacing old ones. This flexibility created opportunities for peaceful coexistence that would have been impossible between Christian and Muslim populations. The Crusades never happened, not because religious conflict disappeared, but because the specific theological and political conditions that created them never arose. Without Christian control of holy sites in Palestine, there was no motivation for European holy wars against Islamic rulers. The energy that our timeline channeled into religious warfare was instead directed toward trade, exploration, and cultural exchange. Viking raids on European monasteries never occurred, since there were no monasteries to raid. Instead, Norse warriors found employment as mercenaries in the service of various pagan kingdoms, spreading Scandinavian culture and religion through peaceful immigration rather than violent conquest. The Spanish Reconquista took on completely different characteristics when Christian kingdoms were replaced by various pagan Germanic tribes. The conflict between Islamic Al-Andalus and Northern European peoples became a cultural and commercial rivalry rather than a religious crusade. Intermarriage and cultural exchange were common along the frontier. Without the unifying force of Christian identity, European kingdoms remained politically fragmented but culturally diverse. This prevented the large-scale religious wars that devastated our historical Europe, but also prevented the political unification that enabled European global expansion. The religious conflicts that did occur were generally local and limited, focused on specific territorial or economic disputes, rather than cosmic battles between competing visions of ultimate truth. The result was a more peaceful, but also more static, medieval world. Chapter 16: Modern Paganism's Global Influence. In our alternative present day, the survival of ancient polytheistic traditions has created approaches to modern challenges that would seem alien to our Christian-influenced world. Environmental crisis, technological advancement, and global cooperation all take on different meanings when filtered through pagan worldviews. Climate change is understood not as punishment for human sin, but as evidence that the balance between earth gods and sky gods has been disrupted by human neglect of proper ritual relationships. Environmental activism becomes a form of religious devotion, with ecological restoration projects organized as community festivals honoring nature deities. Modern technology is embraced as a manifestation of divine creativity, rather than feared as hubris against God's will. Artificial intelligence is seen as an attempt to create new forms of consciousness that might serve as intermediaries between human and divine realms. Genetic engineering is understood as humanity's participation in the ongoing creation of new life forms. Global politics operates on principles of divine plurality rather than universal truth. International relations assume that different peoples will naturally worship different gods and follow different values. This creates more tolerance for cultural diversity, but also makes it harder to establish universal human rights or global moral standards. The internet has become a vast virtual temple where people from around the world can participate in religious ceremonies, share mystical experiences, and create new forms of divine worship. Online mystery schools offer initiation into ancient traditions, while virtual reality technology allows direct experiential encounters with mythological realms. Genetic research has revealed connections between modern populations and ancient peoples that strengthen claims to traditional religious practices. Archaeological discoveries of pre-Christian temples and artifacts become rallying points for religious revival movements that claim unbroken continuity with prehistoric spiritual traditions. This modern pagan world is more environmentally sustainable and culturally diverse, but also more politically fragmented and morally relativistic than our Christian-influenced civilization. The trade-offs between different value systems become clear when we imagine how alternative religious foundations might have shaped human development. Chapter 17: The Digital Age. Gods. The computer revolution has transformed ancient religious practices in ways that would astonish our ancestors. Mystery religions that once required physical presence in underground temples now offer virtual reality initiations that transport participants directly into mythological realms. Artificial intelligence systems are being designed as oracles that can process vast amounts of data to provide guidance and prophecy. These digital deities combine the computational power of modern technology with the wisdom traditions of ancient mystery schools, offering personalized spiritual advice based on astrological calculations, personality analysis, and predictive modeling. Social media platforms have become temples where millions of people gather for daily digital rituals. Morning posts become prayers to dawn deities. Evening shares honor sunset gods. The like and share functions create new forms of collective worship that can spread across the globe in minutes. Blockchain technology enables new forms of religious economy where spiritual services can be traded without centralized institutional control. Meditation teachers in Tibet can receive payments from students in Europe. Shamans in Siberia can perform healing ceremonies for clients in South America via video connection. Gaming technology has revolutionized religious education and spiritual practice. Virtual worlds allow people to explore mythological landscapes, interact with divine beings, and practice ancient rituals in safe digital environments. Some games have become recognized forms of religious expression with their own priesthoods and ceremonial practices. The Internet of Things connects everyday objects to larger spiritual networks. Smart homes can automatically adjust lighting and sound for different religious observances. Wearable devices monitor physiological signs during meditation and prayer, providing feedback about the effectiveness of spiritual practices. This digital transformation of ancient religion creates new possibilities for spiritual community and personal development. but also raises questions about authenticity and the relationship between virtual and physical reality. Can digital experiences provide genuine spiritual transformation, or do they merely simulate the real thing? Chapter 18: The Science versus Spirit Debate. The relationship between scientific investigation and religious truth has developed along completely different lines in a world where polytheistic traditions never faced systematic theological challenge from monotheistic orthodoxy.